Hi there and welcome back to Bernina Club. So coming into winter, I've given you some instructions, some notes all about sewing with knit fabrics, and I've made a couple of garments here to show you. So this was your last inspiration book that you received, and if you haven't received one or would like to buy one, we still have them in store. And as I said last time, I was going to make this sweatshirt top here. So it's called the Cosy, and I've made it out of two different types of fabric, and I'm making it out of a third type of fabric to show you today. So you can make it out of a very soft stretch knit. So I had some $5 a metre fabric just to trial it out, and then I made that, and that is this garment here. This garment here, and as you can see, it is a really nice top. It's got your front seam, your side, two front seams, and then just one sleeve seam. So it's like a batwing top. Very, very, very comfortable. Now the neckline is supposed to be a very high 9 centimetre neckline, which would take it down to about 4.5, but I just didn't like it. So I rolled it backwards and I've actually top stitched it on this one. And then I have made the second top, and this is out of the cotton knit, and with this one I've done a 6 centimetre high neck, and I've top stitched down both sides. So I've overlocked and top stitched, and then I've twin needled the hem, which I'm going to show you anyway, so don't stress about that. I'm going to show you how to do that. So if you've got an overlocker, if you have an overlocker, you can 4-thread overlock your garment. Now what that means is you have got one needle on the left hand side, one needle in the center, and then your top looper, your blue looper, is going to do all the work on the top side, and on the back you are going to use a normal overlocking thread. Now because I've put my Metra flock on the top looper, I've got all this wonderful stretchy movement here. So if you have a look at the overlocker here, I've got the colour of my garment that I want to use on my left hand needle because that's sewing my stitch. I've just got some white Gutermann on my right needle, so sewing thread again. And I've got my Aeroflock, sorry, gosh, they've all got different names. Aeroflock on my blue looper and standard overlocking thread on my lower looper. So this one does all the work on top. This is my right needle and this one is my left needle. And that's how I've sewn this seam. Okay? I'm also going to show you how to do your single and your double overlock on your sewing machine. But what I do want to show you is, if I was going to hem this garment and I folded my hem up and I had all this bulky seam, what happens when you go to stitches is you've got a lot of bulk here, so when you stitch it you're going to go down and up and over and down, and you might skip stitches. So what you actually do when you're going to sew the hem of a garment and you've done a 4-thread overlock, I'm just going to show you here, as you're going to decide on how deep your hem is, and you're going to clip right down to your row of straight stitching, which is your, one moment while I open up my bit of fabric. I didn't realise that this didn't have an open end, so we'll just get rid of that. Okay, so here's my hem of my garment. Here's my seam. This is the right side, and that's my top looper. This is the wrong side, and you just completely face them the opposite way, not cutting through your row of stitching, and then you turn it up. And now you have a really nice flat seam because you don't have the bulk. So I'll show you that again. I've just clipped my fabric right back to my row of stitching. I've pressed one seam one way and one seam the other way. And then when I turn it up, I've got a nice flat seam. So what I do now when I'm going to twin needle this is I just put my pins in from the right side. I measure it up with my sewing gauge. So if that is 3 centimetre seam. I lay it down on my table and I just do 3 centimetres, 3 centimetres, and I just put my pins in on the right side with the heads facing up, and later on I'll show you how to twin needle that. So that's how I do all my seams. Is that 3 centimetres? Oh, a little bit less than that. There we are. And so I do that all the way around, making sure those seams are sitting nice and flat. Okay, and then you get a nice flat finish so you don't get that big bulk at your seams. So that's what I do on all my seams. That's step number 1. Now, if I'm going to sew it on my, whether it's polar fleece or a soft knit, if I'm going to sew it, if you've got a fabric with no stretch, you don't need to do a stretch stitch. So polar fleece, good quality, probably won't have much stretch up the seam, which is the side, but it might have a little bit of stretch that way. So going up this seam, I can just straight stitch that. So I'll just use this blue thread I've got on. I don't need to go changing. I'll just put my jewel feet on. I don't need to go changing that, but I just want to show you so you're aware. And I'm also going to twin needle this so you're aware of what you can and cannot do with these different fabrics. And I think once you learn the different types of fabric, how much stretch they have in, you'll really be able to sew these garments very quickly. So I'm just going to straight stitch up my seam. And I'm going to show you, put it aside, and then I'm going to twin needle all of these afterwards. Now, it's a big myth that you need to overlock a lot of knit fabrics because they don't fray anyway. So this particular fabric, this does not fray at all. So I can just press that seam flat. And for this hem, I can simply turn it up and it's nice and flat. But I'm going to firstly twin needle up both sides because my seam is flat. Okay, so I'm going to twin needle on both sides of these to give you a feature, so I'll do that later. Now on this fabric, so this fabric is very, very stretchy. Okay, it stretches both ways. Okay, so I do need to do either a stretch stitch on this garment or I need to do a double overlock. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the stretch stitch that Bernina have. And on most machines, you will recognise it. So if I show you with this, so a normal zigzag goes like zig, zag, zigzag, nice and even, okay? On a stretch stitch, it does like a lightning bolt. So it goes down, down, down. So it is an impoppable stretch stitch, but it looks like a lightning bolt. So I will do it on here and then I'll show you how much it stretches. If I do this stitch, I don't need to overlock. Okay, this is it. This is all it needs to have done to it. So I'm just going to do the stretch stitch. I wouldn't back stitch. And it's very small. It's very hard to unpick, but it is an impoppable stitch. So it's very, very good. So if you buy any knit fabrics, they usually don't fray. Bad quality knits fray. I did some student sewing classes last week, and honestly, by the time we stretched the fabric, it was just falling apart. So be very careful. Do the stretch test in at the shop where you buy it. When I get here, I can just cut that. Now, this is the impoppable stretch stitch. So it's a really, really good strong stitch, and you can't see where I've stitched it on my garment. It's very, very good. So if I was going to be turning this up for a hem, I'd do exactly the same. I would cut it right back to my stitching. So show you that again. One seam one way, one the other, and fold it up. Or I would open it out flat, which I would do for this one actually. Open it out flat and then fold it up, and that's still very, very, very flat. So there's lots of different options, but don't overcomplicate it and don't over stretch fabric, okay? But on my garment, I've just overlocked it up, okay? So I'm going to show you that. But first of all, I'm going to show you what you do on a neckband. So when you're going to sew a neckband on a garment, or you're going to sew ribbing on a garment, the other thing people do is they overlock the seam, and once again, it's too heavy and too thick. So you just simply straight stitch your seam. So here's my neckband for my top, and I'm just going to put it on straight sewing, and I'm simply going to go forward and reverse, and I'm going to straight stitch my seam. The reason being, and I do exactly the same on ribbing, because the reason being I want to open this seam out flat like that, and I want to put my seam wrong side to wrong side. Now when you're going to be putting this on a garment, so you've got your back seam, I'll just use a clip, your back seam there, okay? Then you need to find the halfway mark so that when you stretch it on, it's nice and even. So I've done, instead of the 9mm, I like the 6mm. So there's my halfway mark, and I'll just put a pin. You need this exact on this one and the side marks. So there's my halfway mark, and then I'm going to put my pin to my back seam and get my exact quarter marks, and this will go aside for later for when I do my neckband. Okay, so I'm going to show you the pattern for this garment, because you just simply trace it out of your book. It's very, very, very quick. It's very, very easy. And I made a size 40 for myself, and it's a nice top. So there I have my back, I have my front marking, and I have my side marking. So remember, don't get your front marking and then fold it to get your side markings. Get your back marking, your front marking, put those together to get the true marks for the side. Okay, so now that's ready to go. So that one, and that one, that was just a spare neckband. Now this one, I'm going to show you on your machine, if you want to do a double overlock, what the machine will do is a straight row down one side, a straight row down the other way, and then it will cross with a zigzag, and that's called the double overlock. So I'm going to do it on this one, and actually I'll stitch some on here to show you, just so you can see what the stitch looks like, because that's blue thread, and that will, you'll understand it when you see it. So it's telling me I can use 3 or 4 different feet. So this is the 1D foot, and I can use this for this, or I can go in and use the 2A. So this is the double overlock stitch. Now this stitch can be used for hemming, it can be used for seaming, because it's very strong, okay? And it's a very, very good stitch. So I could use that to sew my whole garment up if I want, because it is very strong and it's going to hold it all together. So if you don't have an overlock and you're doing garments like this, I'd probably use the double overlock, or for a lighter garment, I'd use the stretch stitch, okay? Now there's other stitches you can use also for hemming. So I might just show you those now, and then we've covered the different stitches you can use. So that is the double overlock. So if I turn up my garment, say that's my hem, I could use the double overlock as a finished seam. So I can just, don't make it too close to the edge, make it a good, that's 2 centimetre hem, so that it doesn't waver. So you want a good size hem. So you can either use the double overlock, or you could use what's called the honeycomb stitch, which is one of my favourites. And you'll notice I've just got my dual feet on. I could put my walking foot on if I want. On a stretch fabric, I quite often use the walking foot. So any of these stitches are going to be good because they stretch with the garment. Okay? So any of your machine stitches that are for stretch sewing you can use. Then what I do is I turn it over to this side, and then I trim it off with my, not these scissors, my duckbill scissors. And I trim it right back. And remember, it's not going to fray. So you're all good. You're all good to go. So if you want to have a fancy stitch showing, you can do that. But I'm going to show you the twin needle later. Okay? Now, so here's the pattern. So this is the front, very easy, cut on the fold. It's so simple, it only has 4 pieces. This is the side, here. So when you are sewing it together, it's simply these seams here. Excuse me. So it's this seam, and then that would be on the fold, and that would go on that side. So the front and the back are just about identical, but the back is cut up higher. Okay, so those are the pieces. So when you cut it out, it's very simple to get on the right grain. So here's the garment I have previously got ready. So now I can show you. So here's my last seam that I've sewn. So I've just simply 4-thread overlocked up the seam. Okay, now what I want to do on the right side is I want to edge stitch it, just like I've done with the white top. And by edge stitching, you get this nice professional top stitch all the way along the side. So this is my last seam to sew. So I'm just going to make sure that this seam goes to the right. Now the foot I want to use to top stitch this is my edge stitch foot number 10. If you've got a bigger machine, you can use 10D, which I'm going to use. And I'm going to put my needle position to the right, and I'm going to put my stitch length longer, so about a 3.4 or so that I've got a longer stitch length. So now I will match the thread to the garment because it's a top stitch. Just like I've done on this top here. Probably a bit hard to see because it's white on white, but it gives it a very professional finish. So I'm going to take off my 1D foot, and I'm going to put on my 1D, I'm going to put on my 10D foot, and I'm going to tell the machine that I'm putting on a 10D foot. You can also get a number 10 foot, which is a D foot, and it looks like that. So for the smaller machines, you can do exactly this as well. So either the 10 or the 10D. So the beauty of this foot is I'm going to use it for edge stitching, top stitching, and I'm also going to use it for twin needling up my garment today. So you get to see a really good use of it. Now when you're twin needling on a garment, on stretch, you cannot use the twin needles with a red top. You have to use the twin needle with a blue top because the blue is for stretch sewing. So I cannot use the red one because that's for normal cotton and woven fabrics, but the blue one is for stretch. Okay, so that's what you're going to use today. I'll just pop it there so I don't forget to use the right one. So now what I'm going to do is show you how to edge stitch this. So I'm edge stitching this to the right because I want my seam to go towards my armhole seam. So I've got my 10D foot on. I'm straight sewing, moving my needle position completely to the right and lengthening it out to about, I've got it on, let's go 3.4. So all that happens is the bar on the foot, so say this is the bar on the foot here. The bar on the foot is going to run along, if I hold this up, it might be easier. The bar on the foot is going to run along that seam that you've previously stitched. And when you have the needle position over, you're going to keep running along that bar and you get a perfectly straight edge. It's brilliant. So that's what the number 10 stitch foot's for. But when you see the twin needling, you're going to love it. So I have got my needle position far right, I've got my stitch length longer, and I don't need to back stitch because I'm going to be turning up my hem. And I'm not going to be overlocking my hem because I'm going to be twin needling it to show you how to twin needle. Okay, so just make sure your seam is to the right. If you need to press it, you can press it, but you usually will find that with knit fabrics you don't have to give it too much pressing. Just nice and slow and steady, and keep the bar running down your seam line. It just gives you such a nice finish. Okay. You can see how nice that's coming out. Much nicer than just having it very plain. So very quick and very, very, very easy to make. Okay. So all I've done is my 4 seams at this stage, exactly the same like that. And then I'm going to put my shoulders together, matching my seams. Pop my shoulders together. Like that. And then I'm putting my sleeve together like this. So you can see it's a very, very quick, easy top to make. Like that. Now remember, when you're pinning any garment, doesn't matter whether it's stretch or not, you always pin with the heads of the pin facing like this, so it's vertical. You don't pin horizontal, because when you pin horizontal you can stretch the fabric. And then that's it. And then I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to pin the hem from the base all the way around to the bottom of the sleeve. So just pin. And then I'm going to overlock that, and when we come back I'm going to show you how you do your twin needling to finish off those hems.